Hello and welcome to the 3D Blu-ray Bunker. This is a place for us die-hard fans of 3D where I look exclusively at 3D Blu-rays, not to review the film itself, but to focus almost entirely on the quality of the 3D, with just a short word at the end about the film itself. And this time I'm looking at Disney's 2012 film John Carter. This is one of those quite rare post-converted 3D movies in that it was shot on film, and rarer still, it was filmed with anamorphic lenses, so the aspect ratio is 2.39 to 1. I say it's post-converted, but this is a CG-heavy effects film, and I think most, if not all, of the CG was actually rendered in 3D rather than being converted, so there is a lot of native 3D in this film. I think there's a lot of pretty good 3D in the film, as well as maybe a bit of less impressive stuff, and it's not simply a case of the native CG always outshining the post-converted live action. So, for example, I think some of the best 3D shots in the film are the ones that feature a load of the Martian Tharks. These are excellent views, full of depth and separation between every character, and there's quite a lot of this in the film, so the 3D CG is working really well here. But they also managed to get similarly great 3D views with some of the converted live action stuff, like this fantastic scene set in the early 1880s, where there's also a really good amount of depth and separation in between all of the elements on the screen. And maybe director Andrew Stanton was aiming for some kind of Hitchcockian homage here, or perhaps there was only one umbrella store in town, but all of these black umbrellas sit very well in 3D space, and the rain looks pretty good too, which suggests that it's been digitally enhanced. And there are other shots where crowds of people are all distinctly separate, so the volume of the scene is felt much better in 3D than in 2D. Where I think the film's 3D is least successful is in all of the live-action characters' faces, which look distinctly flat. Even the brim of Carter's hat isn't doing much here in 3D space. I know it's not as big as the magnificently three-dimensional one that Kate Winslet was wearing at the beginning of Titanic, but even so, it feels like it should be more solid here than it is. And it's really the same with every human face in the film. Back when this was being converted in the early days of that process, I don't think they'd really quite got to grips with the later techniques that allowed for faces to look incredibly solid and lifelike, and whilst maybe it's not really that much of an issue, it does draw attention to itself because the backgrounds are placed quite a long way behind the actors in 3D space, and that's what amplifies that dreaded cardboard cutout look, which really is a bit how it appears here. On the plus side, though, there's a lot to enjoy in some of these views, so it did soften the blow of the 3D being unimpressive slightly. What I thought was a bit odd was that those Tharks don't look all that impressively three-dimensional in close-up either, though. They're an interesting design for 3D in that they have no nose, so a flat face, although the horns sticking out should more than make up for it. But for whatever reason, I thought that these close views of them weren't as good as they could have been. And that leads on to how well the film was designed for 3D. I think the answer to that is that it wasn't really, and the director didn't appear to show any interest in it during the film's fairly disastrous publicity campaign. Sometimes the production design is extremely well suited to 3D, so this interior, for example, is fantastic. It's filled with stuff from the front to the back, and other views in the same room look great in 3D, and lots of other shots throughout the film, like the view inside the saloon here, where the stuff's hanging in the foreground. It's all good 2D framing that translates well into 3D. Or there's the framing of the mausoleum here, with the lines of the hedges stretching deep into the screen towards it. And I think this is an example of the 3D where it's really helping with the story, as it slightly ramps up the significance of the little building there. And there's a very similar shot later on, where the perspective lines lead to the subject deep in the screen. And this is actually my favourite 3D shot in the whole film, I think. It works brilliantly to emphasise how alone the princess is in this moment. And I think this is a really high-quality piece of effective 3D. There's a style of 3D which I like a lot, and that's the hyperstereo view, where the 3D is shown much stronger than the natural human view of the scene. So this opening shot of Mars presents it as a little bit spherical, not dissimilar to how it looked in Ridley Scott's The Martian 2 or 3 years later, although that film did manage to make the planet look more solid than this. And there are lots of other shots with a wider than natural stereo base, like this little place here, or the horses galloping away, which I think looks very nice, or lots of the Martian landscape shots where the 3D is nice and strong, like this rocky outcrop, which I think is somewhere in Utah, or this view, which I guess is a little bit of Utah and a little bit of CG. Either way, it's a distant view with a heightened sense of 3D, and I think it looks really good. And there's another really nice deep landscape view with Mars's moons, Phobos and Deimos, far at the back of the screen. I think someone gives them their Barsoom name in the film, but I can't remember what it was. Some of the times it seemed like there was little thought given to framing things for 3D. For example, these ships flying past, they look okay, but they break the frame rather a lot. And this shot, I think, is a real giveaway, because if you're making a 3D film in which someone picks something up on the end of a spear, this is about as good an example of how not to frame it that I can think of. It's really flat and with virtually no texture to the sky for it to be remotely interesting from a 3D point of view. So for pop-out fans, this isn't a film that really delivers a great deal. There's a very brief blast or this beam thing, but they're both extremely short shots, so not classic pieces of pop-out. There are a few other things that stick out of the screen a bit, like the princess's sword here, with a mild bit of pop-out, and this is a little bit interesting because they use a floating window on the left of the frame, so it's a false vertical border to remove what would otherwise have been a distracting left-right conflict in the edge of the sword there. And they do the same thing with this gun, which pops a long way out of the screen, so we first see it in close-up, and there's a floating window on the right-hand side of the screen. Then when the camera's pulled all the way back and the gun's really sticking out of the screen, for some reason I don't understand, the false border on the right-hand side remains in place, even though the gun's fully within the frame at this point, and that border is in the same 3D space as the end of the barrel, so to my eyes, what that ends up doing is diminishing the effect by making it look like it's not popping out of the screen at all, if that makes sense. I think this must have been one of the earliest films to put lens flare into 3D space, and that's always a fun little view. And I like this view because seeing people behind glass in 3D is usually very effective, but the glass here is either so incredibly clean, or it doesn't even exist, that the effect isn't as impressive as it usually is. Although, to be fair, there are a few other views behind glass where it's either wet or dirty or marked, where the 3D effect is much more noticeable. A similar sort of thing with a nice feeling of depth looking into the cockpit of this flying machine. And we look down on a few of those flying contraptions, which sit really well above the ground. And there are a few other views looking down from high up, that being a story point, which are always effective in 3D. There are lots of other nice 3D compositions, with an old favourite being people behind bars, and these views are all done perfectly well, and the 3D always adds some atmosphere to views of people behind bars, whether it's the captive or the captor, I think. There was a shot which at first looked really dramatically impressive, even though I think only a few of the rays of light here have been put into strong 3D space. Maybe some less elegant work has been done on the others, but I think it could be an example of the 3D not being technically great, but the shot still looks stunning in 3D. In the film, John Carter is transported to Mars, and with the explanation of Mars having a lower gravitational pull than the Earth, he's effectively got superpowers. So basically this is the Superman story, but with the hero coming from Earth rather than Krypton. Anyway, I don't suppose it takes a genius to figure out that John Carter has the same initials as one of history's supreme beings with godly powers, which I'm sure was very intentional. And speaking of James Cameron, there's a shot not unlike Avatar's transfer sequence, passing through a tunnel of light, and although this one is very brief, I thought it actually looked more three-dimensional than the one in Avatar. I think the film's location where the 3D is at its most impressive is this place, which when they approach it appears to be a bit of a nod to Star Wars with what initially looks like some sort of rocky Millennium Falcon. Anyway, inside there are these tunnels that look like kind of sinuous rock, so these are perfect for 3D, not just stretching deep into the screen, but you can also see through and beyond the structure. This is excellent, and it looks best of all in a low-to-the-ground shot where you get that naturally impressive 3D view of the ground, but you can also see through it, so this is great 3D. So just a very quick word about the film itself. If you haven't seen it, you'll probably be aware that this doesn't have a good reputation, and it was absolutely savaged by critics prior to opening, and it failed at the box office. I think that the director managed to annoy a lot of people during its promotion with some of the things he said, and the marketing campaign is generally agreed to have been a complete disaster. The film's title is obviously awful, and the fact that the film was simply called John Carter alone may have cost Disney a few $100 million in lost revenue. Any number of other titles would have served it better, and for me, I'd go with John Carter and the Princess of Mars. I sometimes wonder how different films would be if Star Wars had failed at the box office, and certainly there'd have been no sequels, no dodgy prequels, no hugely divisive sequel trilogy. Basically, there'd be no nonsense, just a hardcore of fans who would be those few in the know with a love for a mostly forgotten classic. Well, to some degree, I think of John Carter as that film. I'm not saying it's as good as Star Wars, but I do think it's a great fun film with a huge spectacle, with lots going for it. It's got a lovely look to it, presumably taking inspiration from 100 years' worth of illustrations of the Edgar Rice Burroughs novels on which it's based. The two leads, Taylor Kitsch and Lynn Collins, are engaging. They've got some chemistry between them. It's full of some excellent supporting actors, hamming it up nicely, including Mark Strong and Dominic West, Bryan Cranston, and a guy who I always think should have been a huge star, the excellent James Purefoy. And there are alien voices provided by Samantha Morton and Willem Dafoe, and apparently David Schwimmer and Jon Favreau do some too, although I can't say I noticed them. The story's good fun, it's often funny, there's a very ugly but lovable alien dog, and the music's really good too. So John Carter's a jaded Civil War officer veteran with a tragic background who finds himself in the alien world of Barsoom, having to make decisions and take action that may lead to redemption. And I thought it all played out in a way that was very satisfying. I think maybe best of all, it's one of those films where it's been an enjoyable 2-hour ride, and in the last 5 or 10 minutes really dial things up, and for me anyway, it was a thrilling finale that put a big smile on my face. Of all the legendary bad films that I know of, I think this is the one that least deserves its reputation, and I think it's nothing at all like the film that its critics told you it was. So for its mostly good 3D, and for being a great fun old-fashioned film, I'd definitely recommend this for anyone's 3D Blu-ray collection. So I hope you found this in some way useful, and if so, I hope you'll join me again soon for another 3D Blu-ray review. Until then, thanks for looking in on this one. Cheers for now, bye-bye.